Thank you, folks, for coming to the very next program on attracting butterflies with native plants. By planting the appropriate native plants, your yard will attract a variety of butterflies. I might add a wide variety of butterflies, which in turn attract birds, so it relates. Native plantings also require less water, less fertilizer, and generally easier to maintain. We'll take a look at the benefits of native plantings for the butterflies and discuss the trees, shrubs, and perennials that will host the butterflies and provide an inviting place for you to enjoy. Karen Newbern has been a naturalist and environmental educator for over 30 years. She was the naturalist at the Ridges Sanctuary in Bailey's Harbor for 14 years. Currently, she is the retail nursery supervisor at Door Landscape and Nursery, a company specializing in native plants for home landscapes. And I can tell you we've gotten some wonderful plants there. I recommend it. Was that written down here? No?
You're one of our best customers? No.
Oh, really? Well, I am, so there. No, that's, but Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Dale. Oops. And he really is one of our better customers, I'll tell you that. Oops. Oh, wait, I see. Hang on a minute. There, that should work a little bit better. All right. Well, I want to say thank you for letting me come and speak with you this afternoon. I do have a lot of pretty pictures, so I'm glad that the PowerPoint is working. A little nervous there for a while. I just want to mention a little bit about my place of employment. Door Landscape and Nursery is located between Sturgeon Bay and Egg Harbor, right along Highway 42. We are a full-service landscape company, so we do everything from consultations to landscape design, to installations, to maintenance, to stone work like patios, things like that. But we specialize in the use of native plants. And as far as I know, no one has contradicted me yet, but as far as I know, we're the largest retailer of native plants in Door County, and I'm going to guess in Kewaunee County too. We do have a retail center, so a lot of the plants that I'm going to be talking about today are available at our nursery. And barring any April blizzards like we had last year, we will be open on May 1st. So we'll be open every day through the season. I would invite you to come up and visit us and take a look at what we offer. And as I mentioned, a lot of the plants that I'm going to talk about today are things that we actually carry in our retail area. Well, I think everybody would agree that butterflies are probably one of the most appealing insects out there. Most people, have this thing about bugs. It's like, ugh, they're creepy, they're awful, they're scary. Butterflies, I don't know very many people who are afraid of butterflies or don't enjoy seeing them. And they're fascinating creatures. They have an amazing life cycle. They're gorgeous. They're really fun to watch. Unfortunately, though, a lot of butterfly populations are in decline. And go ahead. There's a lot of different reasons for that. As is true with most kinds of wildlife, habitat loss is the biggest cause of declines in butterfly population. Agriculture, obviously we've turned a lot of natural habitats into agricultural lands, urbanization, even our obsession with lawns. And I apologize to anybody who really likes your lawn. Lawns have their place, but I think we've gotten a little carried away with our lawns. And a lawn is not a very good habitat for very much of anything. And if you want butterflies, rethinking lawn is probably something that you want to do. But all of these things have caused declines in butterfly populations really all over the world. The butterfly that's been studied the most, or that we have the most data on in terms of their population, is the monarchs. And the numbers on this chart really you don't have to really know the exact numbers, but what they do is they represent the area in acreage in Mexico where monarchs spend their winters. And this is the best way that we have of estimating their populations, is looking at the areas where they're found in Mexico in the wintertime. And this goes from 1994 up through 2018. So it's pretty recent data. And just by looking at those orange bars, you can see what's happening to our monarch population. Some scientists estimate that we've lost as much as 90% of our monarch population. So it's kind of scary. You know, you start looking at these numbers. We don't have a lot of data like this on other species because they just haven't been studied as well as the monarch has. But I'm guessing that a lot of our butterfly species are experiencing the same kinds of declines for exactly the same reasons: habitat loss, agricultural chemicals, climate conditions. Some of those winters where there were really, really low numbers of monarchs, they had bad storms, either as they were migrating down to Mexico or while they were in Mexico, or the weather. One of those years there was a drought in Texas, really, really bad drought a few years ago. So when the butterflies were starting to migrate north, there were no nectar plants and there was no milkweed because of the drought. So climate factors are involved too. Well, fortunately, there's a lot that we can do to remedy that habitat loss. And it literally starts right in our own backyards. You can create a butterfly habitat, whether you have a huge yard, whether you have a small yard, even if you live in an apartment, if you have a balcony or a patio or something, you can create habitat for butterflies. Now granted, these are small. These aren't thousands and thousands of acres, at least not all in one place. There's a lot of evidence that creating small habitats, creating lots of small backyard habitats for butterflies and other insects can be very, very beneficial. So a little change that you make in your yard can make a big difference overall. So that's important to remember. But you know, you think, well, yeah, I want more butterflies, but what do I do? How do I get started on it? Well, really planting a butterfly garden is very, very similar to any other kind of garden planning that you're going to do. You look at what you have available in terms of soil and sunlight and all of that. You select plants. You have to do a little bit of homework. And butterfly gardens, one thing that's important to remember is a butterfly garden can be as big or as small as you want it. If you have a big yard and you have lots of space for flower beds, that's wonderful. If you want to put in just one bed that's designated for the butterflies, although they may not follow the boundaries, they may go to other beds too, but you can create a small bed. You can even do container gardening with butterfly plants, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So no matter what kind of conditions you're working with, you can probably find something that's going to benefit the butterflies. So we have to start out by thinking about what the butterfly's wish list is. If we want them to come to our yards, we have to provide the things that they need. So what's the most obvious thing that butterflies are going to need? Some kind of food, that's right. And when we're thinking about butterflies, we have to remember that the adults and the caterpillars eat different things. They don't have the same foods. You know, we think about butterfly gardening and putting in plants that have lots of nectar, and that's great for the adults, but the caterpillars don't eat nectar. And if we really want to support butterfly populations in our yards, we have to think about the things that caterpillars eat too. So we're going to talk more about that a little bit later on. What else do butterflies need? What else do you think is on their wish list?
Sorry.
You put it up there already. That's why John's saying the story.
It's water, yeah. And you know, just like they're wildlife and just like we need water, butterflies need water to survive. And there's one more, but don't do it yet.
I was
I
shelter.
heard it. Shelter, right,
No,
there you go.
I mean, I know, but I was trying to give somebody else.
Butterflies are small insects. They don't weigh very much. They're really tougher than we think, but you know, they're kind of fragile beings. And so they need shelter from weather, and they need shelter from predators too, because there are birds and other creatures that will eat butterflies. So they have to have some kind of a safe place to avoid those predators. Or if it's pouring down rain, they don't really want to be out in the rain. You know, a butterfly getting hit by a raindrop is kind of like somebody hitting you with a really, really big water balloon. Not very pleasant. So you have to think about these things while you're planning for your butterfly garden in your landscape. So let's talk about food. Food is the most interesting part anyway. When you go to the garden center and you're looking for butterfly plants, you're going to see some of them that are labeled as butterfly friendly. And most of the plants that are labeled that way, or say good for butterflies, are good sources of nectar. And again, that's what most of the adult butterflies are going to be feeding on. They want plants that have a lot of nectar in them because that's got a lot of sugar for energy and it gets them going, and that's what they need. So when you're shopping for butterfly plants, usually that's what they mean when they say butterfly friendly. Butterflies as adults are generalists, which means they're not as picky as you might think. They do have certain favorite plants. There are certainly plants that are better for butterflies than others, more attractive to butterflies, but they'll go to a lot of different kinds of plants as adults. So you can plant a wide variety of species and the butterflies can be attracted to those. Some butterflies actually feed on rotting fruit. Some butterflies actually feed on, or get their water from primarily, animal dung. Not something you want to put in your backyard, but, well, maybe, you know. So when you're thinking about adult food, you're thinking primarily about nectar. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing, and it just dawned on me. If you have questions or have something that doesn't make sense to you, just holler out and let me know. I'm happy to answer things during the program or at the end. So if you're looking at, how can you provide food for butterflies that like the fruit, I've seen this picture of the butterfly or the banana feeder floating around on Facebook the last couple of weeks. And basically what you do is you just take it, you can make your own just with a coil of wire. They peeled off a couple strips of the peel so that the banana itself was exposed. And butterflies may find that and may find it very, very attractive. Some butterflies like to feed on rotting fruit, so if you've got some apples that got a little too far gone in the refrigerator or whatever, you can put those out, and those might be attractive to butterflies as well. But when we're thinking about the food for caterpillars, caterpillars are much more specific. Some caterpillars will only feed on one group of plants or maybe even one particular species of plant. And the reason for that is that plants don't want to be eaten. They produce chemicals that inhibit, that are going to deter animals from browsing on them. But the insects, the caterpillars in turn, have developed resistance to some of these chemicals. It's kind of like chemical warfare. The plant produces something to keep the insects away, the insects develop a resistance to it. Well, these relationships have been going on for a long time, and so the caterpillars have become quite specific about what plants they'll use. We call those host plants, by the way. And probably the example that everybody's familiar with is monarch butterflies. Monarchs will only eat milkweed plants when they're caterpillars. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of milkweed, and we're going to talk a little bit about those later on. But if you wanted to really, really support monarch butterflies in your yard, you would want to plant milkweed. There's some other examples too with it, some native plants, and I'll do even a few more later on. This top plant is called white turtle head. The flowers, it's a native plant. The flowers actually look a little like the head of a turtle, if you use your imagination. They are the host plant, which means they are caterpillar food for the caterpillars of the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. If you don't have white turtle head in the area, you're probably not going to see very many of these butterflies. Plants that are in the parsley or dill family, this one is a native one called golden alexanders. What a great name. They support swallowtail caterpillars. And so if you have dill or parsley growing in your yard, you may have seen these caterpillars feasting away on your herbs. And if you have lupins growing in your yard, you may be supporting hairstreak caterpillars. You might not see them because those caterpillars in particular are pretty small and they kind of blend in. But by planting host plants, we can provide support for the butterflies in their caterpillar stage, and then also provide nectar plants for them as they get a little bit older. Let's talk about water for a little bit. Butterflies don't need much water, and they get most of the water that they need from the nectar that they drink, or sometimes from other sources, dew that's on leaves, or raindrops. They can get water from tree sap. Actually, this time of year, when the sap is starting to run, if there's sap on the outside of a tree, you may see some of our very early butterflies feeding on that sap. And as I mentioned earlier, some butterflies will get water from animal waste. One thing I might mention, the yellow butterflies up here in the corner, the sulfur butterflies, you've probably seen them in the summer and early fall where there will be dozens and dozens and dozens of them in a wet spot on your ground or around a mud puddle. That behavior is actually called puddling. And not only are the butterflies getting water, but they're also getting minerals from the soil. And those minerals are very, very important, especially when it comes to reproduction. Usually, but not always, the butterflies that are puddling are the males. And what they do is they get this extra boost of minerals. They pass that along to the female in their sperm when they breed. And so the females get a little extra boost of nutrition too. So without those minerals, they may not reproduce as well. So when you see those butterflies puddling like that, you know that they're all getting ready to reproduce. When we talk about shelter, again, as I mentioned earlier, shelter can be shelter from weather, like rain. It can be shelter from predators. In general, trees and shrubs are some of the best shelter for butterflies, so we want to think about planting those in our landscapes as well. They can get in under the leaves and hide from their predators. So when you're thinking about these things, you're thinking about food, water, and shelter. You can start to plan your butterfly garden, kind of get in your head how you're going to proceed. And the first thing you want to do is take a look at what you already have. If maybe you already have a lot of really good nectar plants growing in your yard, but maybe you need to add some shelter, some shrubs or something where the butterflies can take shelter. Maybe you just want to add a source of water. Maybe your yard is kind of shady. Butterflies need quite a bit of sun, and so you might think about removing a tree or some shrubs to create a little bit more sunny areas. So look at what you already have and see, what's missing? What are the butterflies looking for that I'm not providing yet? And that's kind of where you start. Then you can identify which butterflies you're most likely to find in your region, the kind that are going to show up in your yard most likely. You're not going to get any blue morpho butterflies or any of those tropical species, obviously, here in Wisconsin. But look at the butterflies that you might be able to attract and what their preferred plants are, whether it be host plants for the caterpillars or the nectar plants. And a really good resource for that is wisconsinbutterflies.org/butterfly. And if you go on that website, you can actually select a county in Wisconsin, and it'll tell you all of the species of butterflies that have been documented in that county. From that information, then you can use the internet or books or whatever to look at those different species, find out what the food plants are that they prefer, and you can then add those to your landscape. Then you get around to, now you know what butterflies you're most likely to attract. Then you can look at how to select the plants for your garden. And the first thing you want to do, whenever possible, use native plants. And there's an important reason for that. As I was mentioning earlier, the insects and the plants have evolved together over hundreds and thousands and millions of years. And so if you can use native plants, especially when it comes to host plants, you're going to have a much bigger impact, much more success by using the natives. Also, natives are really well suited to our climate. They can tolerate our winters, they can tolerate humid summers. They don't require as much maintenance. Generally, they don't need fertilizers or pesticides in order to thrive. So think about native plants when you're starting to plan your plant list. You want to also think about offering flowers throughout the season. April, it's not unusual to see butterflies that are active in April in Wisconsin. So you want to think about, what are the really early blooming things that are going to give them a source of nectar. You also want to think about late in the season. Butterflies may still be active well into October, especially along the lake where we tend to stay warmer in the fall. The butterflies are still going to be active into October, maybe even into November. So you want to think about late flowering plants as well. Think about planting different heights. Some butterflies like to be up on tall plants. Some like to be kind of medium height. Some like to be a little closer to the ground. Again, that's kind of a general garden design idea that you have different heights of things. Butterflies tend to like flowers that are pink, purple, yellow, orange, sometimes red, although butterflies see colors a little bit differently than we do. They don't see as much detail as we do. They also see ultraviolet light, which we don't see. So the flowers are going to look a little bit different to the butterflies, but they do tend to be attracted to the pinks and oranges, and you'll see that when we start looking at the plants that are really, the nectar plants that are really attractive to butterflies. Butterflies also seem to like flowers that are kind of tubular, because they have a long proboscis, or tongue, if you will, that they can stick into a flower and slurp the nectar out. They also like flowers that have clusters or spikes with lots of little flowers on them instead of one big flower. And they can travel around on top of that plant, and they can get all kinds of nectar from all of those little blossoms. And you'll see that also when we talk about nectar plants and which ones are used the most by butterflies. I will also mention that flowers that offer kind of a landing pad for the butterfly. Think of a daisy. It's kind of a large flat blossom, and that's an easy place for the butterfly to land when he's ready for a meal. Plant in groups. Butterflies are more likely to see groups of a flower instead of maybe one single one here and one single one over there. And I have to confess, I am a gardener. I plant in drifts of one. I'll plant one plant over here, and I'll plant one over here. I tend not to put them in big groups. So I'm probably not, the butterflies probably aren't as attracted to that as they might be if I had a whole bunch of daisies, or a whole big swath of black-eyed Susans, or a whole bunch of lavender, or whatever that purple thing is in the middle. I think it's lavender. So think about planting groups of plants. And again, it depends on how much space you have. Maybe you don't have enough room to plant a huge drift of whatever kind of plant it is, but do as much as you can to plant them in groups, and the butterflies will thank you. Providing water is very easy. Now, just a normal bird bath, the water in there is going to be too deep for the butterflies. They're not going to use it. But if you fill that bird bath up with sand, or soil even, and keep it moist, the butterflies are going to be able to come, and they're going to be able to get the moisture they need by puddling, like we mentioned before. You can put some rocks along the edge where they can kind of hang out and sit in the sun while they're waiting their turn. You might even think about, this is one area, you might even think about mixing a little manure in with that sand or soil, whatever you put in there. That, again, is going to provide minerals that the butterflies need in order to thrive. I mentioned earlier, butterflies also need sun. Most butterflies, they're insects, and insects are cold-blooded, so they don't get operating too well until the temperature gets above about 50 degrees. So you want to give the butterflies places where they can just kind of hang out in the sun, bask there, and warm up so that they can become more active. And that can be rocks, it could be just a flat rock, especially if it's darker colored. If you have some darker colored stone where the butterflies can hang out, they might bask on the side of a tree, on the tree bark, even paved areas. If you've got a paved patio or your sidewalk or something like that, butterflies might bask on that to warm their bodies up so that they can become more active. Shelter. I mentioned earlier, trees and shrubs are excellent shelter for butterflies. They can get in, especially if it's a dense one. This is a type of viburnum. Viburnums are a great group of shrubs, very beneficial for butterflies and lots of other wildlife as well. But the butterflies can get in there if they're trying to escape from a bird that's going to eat them, or if it's raining and they need to take shelter, they can get inside that tree or inside that shrub and be very, very well protected in it. Also, I'll mention trees and shrubs are some of the best host plants for caterpillars. I'll talk more specifically about that in a minute. Other places where butterflies might take shelter, if you've got an old tree trunk or stump or a dead tree in your yard, if the bark is a little bit loose, butterflies can get in under there to hide. In fact, there are species of butterflies that actually spend the winter as adults, and they do that by getting into, cracks and crevices in the bark and places where they can hide out, and that's where they'll spend the winter. In the lower right-hand picture there, brush piles are really good places for butterflies to take shelter. And in the upper right-hand corner there, messy gardening. If you're a kind of a lazy gardener and you didn't get your flower beds all cleaned up last fall, you probably did a huge favor to the butterflies. Some butterflies overwinter in their chrysalis or cocoon, and they make those in among the stems of dead grasses and plants. If you cleaned those all up in the fall, you just got rid of a whole bunch of insects that wouldn't make it over to winter. Or if you clean up your garden really early in the spring. Generally, it's recommended that you wait until temperatures are above 50 pretty consistently. Because again, if you go in and you clean up all the dead material in your flower beds and get them nice and clean and neat, you've probably removed a lot of chrysalids or overwintering insects that then won't be able to hang out in your garden. So be a lazy gardener and leave your garden messy during the fall and into the spring, and the insects will thank you. I can do that. You may have seen butterfly houses like this, and they're very attractive. They're kind of fun to have in your yard. As far as their benefit to butterflies, it's not really been proven that the butterflies use them a lot. In my experience, hornets tend to move into them. Some hornets and wasps are good pollinators, and you might want to have them in your garden, but you're probably not going to see butterflies using something like this. So, if you want to put one in your garden, it's attractive, but the butterflies are probably going to prefer a more natural kind of shelter. Probably the most important thing in your butterfly garden is to not use pesticides. It's got to be a pesticide-free zone. Even so-called natural pesticides or organic pesticides are designed to kill insects. And so if you, let's say you've got milkweed and the milkweed gets attacked by aphids, which happens very frequently. If you spray for the aphids, you're going to be spraying the caterpillars that may be on that plant. So you want to avoid pesticides in every instance you can. If you absolutely have to use a pesticide, for instance, on your milkweed, check to make sure there aren't any caterpillars hanging out on there. Use it as selectively, as specifically as you can. And that will make a huge difference in not just the pollinators, but the other not just the butterflies, but also other pollinators like bees and so on that'll be in your yard. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. We get to talk about some of the specific plants that are really well suited to your butterfly garden. And again, I'm going to emphasize the natives because they are the ones that the butterflies have evolved with, and they're the easiest to take care of, and I would argue some of the prettiest, some of the most beautiful. So milkweeds, again, we know that in order to have monarchs, we need milkweed. And it's not just because the caterpillars eat the milkweed, but milkweed is an excellent nectar source for a lot of insects. I don't even know how many insects hang out on milkweed, but it's a lot more than just the monarchs. Yeah?
What if you have a pet?
What's that?
What if you have a pet?
What if I have a pet?
Yeah.
Do you mean like for spraying for the bugs and stuff? That's gonna, if you have a pet, by not using pesticides in your garden, you're gonna help them too. So it's good for your pets to not have those chemicals. And your pet might chase the butterflies though. Especially, yeah, I know like dogs and cats like to chase butterflies too, but the butterflies are pretty good at getting away. So I think they're safe. Butterflies, or monarchs, try that again. Milkweed, as I was mentioning, is a really, really good nectar source. And there's dozens of insects that use milkweed. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different kinds of milkweed, so you can pick a milkweed that suits your particular landscape. The common milkweed, which is in the lower left here, this is the one that you see growing wild all over the place. I generally don't recommend it for home gardens because it does tend to spread. Doesn't necessarily go to seed, even though they do produce a lot of seed, they send out rhizomes or runners under the ground, and pretty soon you've got milkweed popping up everywhere. And some people may not like that. If you want a little bit more tidy garden or you want to restrain the milkweed, common milkweed is probably not the one you want to use. But there are other species out there. I'll save that one for last. The one right in the middle is called just red milkweed. It's actually pink, but they call it red milkweed. It's a milkweed of wetter areas. If you've got a low wet area in your yard or along the edge of a pond or a stream, the red milkweed is excellent. In my experience, this is one that gets more monarch caterpillars than any of the other varieties. There's also a white variety. It's basically the same species. It just has white flowers, so that's another one that likes wetter areas. If you have a hot, dry, sunny part of your yard, the orange one, the upper right, is just called butterfly milkweed or butterfly weed. It is an excellent one for hot, dry conditions. It doesn't spread all over the place. It forms a really nice, it kind of gets a little bit shrubby. It gets maybe about 3 feet tall and 2 or 2.5 feet across. I will mention it comes up very late in the spring, so you want to mark where it is because you may not even see it until end of May, first part of June.
Any suggestions on like trying to dig that up and move it? I found
the butterfly milkweed?
I found very difficult. There was a area near where I used to live in Dykesville, and I knew they were going to develop there, and it was growing there, and I should have probably have, I don't know, hacked it up in the fall kind of to loosen it up into chunks, because then in the spring before they came, the roots were,
They have
it was a bit like a huge prairie plant, and it was like,
Exactly. They are a prairie plant, and they send down a really deep taproot. So once they've been established for a couple of years, it is very hard to transplant them.
what should I have done in a situation like that? Because
Well,
it did not work.
If you had more time, you could have tried to divide it. You might have been able to separate the crown, but it's a tough one that
Yeah,
you
that's
want
what
to
I
plant
thought.
it.
I should have done that in, just early in the winter like a hosta, but I didn't know. I marked it and I came back in the spring and
Yeah, that's a tough one to move once it's established.
Okay.
You want to figure out where it's going to be and put it there and make sure that it's going to stay there. But it's a wonderful plant, and that bright orange color is just pops, and it's very, very attractive. The one in the lower right, this is one called showy milkweed. It's technically not native to Wisconsin. It's native a little bit further south, but it will grow here in Zone 5. And it's kind of neat. It grows a lot like the common milkweed, but the flowers are much bigger and they look kind of star-like. And it's a really, really cool milkweed. It's not very widely available, but you can sometimes find it. I want to mention this one in the upper left here. This is a tropical kind of milkweed, and you'll find it at garden centers. Up here, we can only grow it as an annual. It will not winter over. A lot of people grow it in containers. It's a really good butterfly plant if you do in containers. There is some controversy about the tropical milkweed in southern states where it doesn't go dormant, where it's growing all year round. There's some evidence that monarchs will tend to hang out in those areas where this tropical milkweed is growing. They breed, they lay eggs, but there's more of a chance for a disease. I can't even remember the name of it. I know they abbreviate it OE, and the OE is more prevalent where the butterflies are more concentrated. So there's kind of conflicting research either way on whether this is something that's actually harming monarchs, or it doesn't stop them from migrating. Some people say, well, the butterflies will get there and they'll hang out. It doesn't really stop them from migrating, but there are areas in the U.S. where the monarchs just don't migrate. They hang out like in Florida. So there's mixed reviews about that. I think up here in Wisconsin, we're pretty safe planting it and using it as an annual. The butterflies aren't going to stick around here, and it's going to die in the fall anyway. So if you like it, it is really beautiful. It's very colorful. And I will also mention with the butterfly milkweed, the orange one, there's a yellow variety now that has been developed by plant breeders. It's called Hello Yellow. And that is one example of a native plant that's been hybridized or tweaked a little bit that is just as good for butterflies as the native variety. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes our hybridized varieties are not very valuable. But in the case of the Hello Yellow milkweed, it's just as valuable, just as well used by butterflies as the other milkweeds. So, and there's other kinds of milkweed too. There's probably 10 or 12 different kinds of milkweed that are native here to Wisconsin. So look for one that suits your needs. Asters. Asters are one of my favorite groups of butterfly plants because they bloom for a long time And they bloom late in the season. Some of them bloom on through October, maybe even into November. This one in the photo is called New England aster. And it's a little bit hard to see in the picture because I was trying to capture the whole plant. This is, believe it or not, just one aster plant. But there's probably 20 to 25 butterflies on there. You can see, as you start to look, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one over there. They're all over that plant, and they love it. And so asters, and there's a lot of different varieties. You can get purple ones, pink ones, white ones, tall ones, short ones. The New England aster is probably the biggest and showiest of our natives, and it comes in either purple or kind of a pink color. Great plants for butterflies. Most of them like full sun. There are a couple of varieties that will take some shade as well.
We planted asters, and for most of the summer thought it was a weed, thought it was a weed, thought it was a weed. We were thinking if nothing happens, it's going next year, but come along October, November, yeah, suddenly, boom, it goes, and you're like, really?
Yeah, asters are not real exciting during most of the summer.
No, they're not.
In fact, one of the things that they tend to do is lose all the leaves on the bottom of the stem.
Yeah.
So I recommend planting grasses or other plants around them. But like you said, when they come into flower in September and October and the butterflies are there, it's just amazing.
And just as either, early in the morning as the sun's coming up or it's sinking, you'll get lots of, like you said, butterflies, and particularly a lot of the sulfurs, and it almost looks like it's like alive and glowing and photofluorescing, with the light, and they're moving. It is incredible. But John is right. They do look.
It's a weed, it's a weed. No, it's not a weed. We planted it. It's a weed. No, it's not a weed.
I mean, it looked so much like so many different kinds of weeds. It is, and what I did, because I had some kids helping me garden, is I actually, when I spread some more out, I actually put tomato cages around it initially, because they get big and tall, but also so for the same reason John said, because somebody that's like trying to help you thinks, oh, yeah. And they also get mildew.
Yes, yeah, they
Before
do
they
tend to
bloom,
get mildew, and that's why a lot of times the leaves fall off the bottom. But they're tough plants, and they'll survive that perfectly well.
You pointed out the butterflies. How many honeybees were on that?
Oh gosh, there
tons.
were all tons of bees. You can't see them in the picture, but it was, like you said, it was literally alive. It was just humming with bugs. Really amazing.
Entertaining for the fall.
Yes, definitely. Okay,
Oh, that's me.
that's you. Coneflowers are another great group of butterfly plants. Again, native species. They have that kind of landing pad where the butterfly can land on them. And the center part of the coneflower is actually many, many tiny flowers. So they just wander around on there, and they're drinking nectar from all of those little bitty flowers. The one on the left is the purple coneflower. The one on the right with the droopy petals is pale purple coneflower. I actually like the look of that one even better. And the yellow coneflower in the middle. Now, when you go to the garden center, you're going to see a lot of other colors of coneflowers. Coneflower has been widely hybridized, and you can get pure white, you can get red, you can get orange, you can get yellow, you can get pink.
Hot lime is the big one.
Hot lime, yep, kind of greenish chartreuse flowers. The one thing I would say with coneflowers, again, when plants are hybridized, sometimes they lose some of their value to insects in particular. They may not produce as much nectar, for example. If you've got this type of a coneflower, this one's called hot papaya, it's really cool. But when they hybridized it and got it to produce all these extra little petals in the middle, they eliminated the flowers, the flower parts there that actually produce the pollen. So in our nursery, where we have all of these coneflowers all kind of grouped together, the butterflies aren't going to the hot papaya. They're going to the natives, or they're going to the ones that have the single blossoms. So think about that when certainly if you like hot papaya, go ahead and plant it, but it's not going to be as beneficial for the butterflies as some of the native varieties or the ones that are, the single petals. In general, that's true. If you have a plant that's been hybridized and it's got lots of extra petals, it probably doesn't have much nectar. Blazing star, another really great native plant. Again, this was one or two plants in the nursery were loaded with monarchs and other insects. There's a lot of different kinds of blazing stars. Some are smaller, some are really tall. Some of them have a nice dense spike of flowers. Some of them have little like button-like clusters of flowers. Again, some like a little more moisture, some like a little drier. So you can pick, there's actually a white variety of blazing star. The spike one on the side there comes in a white too. I don't know if that really matters to the butterflies. They will visit white flowers as well. So again, your personal preference. Blazing stars are tough. They do well without very much care. They multiply over time. Some of them do tend to self-seed pretty readily, so they might spread into areas that you don't want them. But again, just a wonderful mid to late summer nectar source. Just a few other natives here. Goldenrod, up in the upper left-hand corner. Goldenrod has a bad reputation for causing hay fever, but it's actually not the goldenrod that's causing that problem. It's the ragweed that's blooming at the same time. Goldenrod is another one of those plants that's incredibly valuable for bees and pollinating wasps and butterflies and beetles and all kinds of insects. The butterfly is on there, but if you look closely, you can see a couple other and when I found this picture, I think they said there were like 2 or 3 different kinds of bees on there. So wonderful, wonderful plant. Any of the native sunflowers. This one is a woodland type of sunflower. It'll actually grow in shadier areas. Those are really, really good for butterflies. The middle on the top there is a penstemon. Penstemons have tubular flowers, which also attract hummingbirds. So if you like hummingbirds, that's a good plant. The one in the upper right is called Joe Pye weed. It gets, the flowers are very small and they just kind of look fuzzy and pink, but they come in big clusters, like this big. And this is another one that in late summer, early fall will just be humming with insects. Lower right is a coreopsis, really nice plant for dry, sunny kinds of areas. And the one in the middle is called anise hyssop. Anise hyssop, it smells like anise, it smells like black licorice. And the butterflies and other insects really love it. Warning about that one, it sells seeds like crazy, which is good if you want more of them, but if like you've got them in a garden bed and there's any bare soil around it, you'll have 1 million of them the next year. So what I tell people is as those flowers start to fade, cut the flower heads off, otherwise you're going to have them everywhere. But it's a really good plant, so if you got room for it, let it spread. Let's talk about a few of the non-natives. There are really good non-native nectar plants. And I don't want to discourage people from planting these because they are also very good nectar sources. Phloxes, for example. The creeping phlox, which is an earlier spring flower, those bloom in May, so that's a good one for early butterflies, or the taller phloxes that bloom later on into the summer. Both of those are highly attractive to butterflies and also hummingbirds. The cosmos on the right-hand side, this is one of those examples where you want to pick the old-fashioned single-petaled varieties because they provide more nectar and pollen. The double types of cosmos that look almost like a rose or something don't have very much nectar. They're not going to be as attractive to butterflies. Zinnias are amazing for butterflies. Again, if you pick kind of the fewer petaled, the single-petaled varieties. This is one, the Master Gardeners in Door County planted this one in their demonstration garden last summer. It's called Zowie Yellow. There's a Zowie Orange and a Zowie Red, I think, too. It was loaded with butterflies all season long. And if you deadhead them, they bloom for a very long time. And it gets about 3 feet tall, so it's a pretty big plant. But it was amazing for the butterflies. In the middle there, that's flowering tobacco, or Nicotiana. They have kind of a tubular flower. They're very fragrant. Another really good one for butterflies and hummingbirds. And the one on the lower right is called Mexican sunflower, or Tithonia is the genus name. This is, I think, one of the most attractive plants, especially to monarchs, that I've seen that's not native. These get big. They get about 4 feet tall, and they're covered with these orange or yellow blossoms all summer long. If you deadhead them, they just keep blooming and blooming and blooming. And the butterflies get so excited about feeding on them that they just are kind of oblivious to everything that's going on around them. And you chase them away. If you scare them away, they fly around and they come right back to the same flower. It's amazing, but it's a really, really good plant. A little bit hard to start from seeds, but if you can find the plants, the seedlings in the spring, I think the Door County Master Gardeners grow it for their plant sale, I'm not sure. But that's another good one. These are some examples of, we talked about clumps or clusters of little flowers that are attractive to butterflies. So things like heliotrope, likes hot, dry, does really well. Lantana in the middle up there. Sweet alyssum, that grows close to the ground, and that's really nice for the butterflies that like to feed close to the ground. Verbena, and also the different types of salvia or sage. Again, purple tubular flowers, lots of nectar there, really, really good source.
Wait. Oh,
Now, go ahead.
wait a minute. Okay, you said sweet alyssum, salvia, sage, something that's really common that I just spaced.
Lantana,
I've got lantana.
heliotrope,
I got that, so there's one I missed.
verbena.
That's it.
Verbena.
Thank you.
I call that one verbena on a stick because it's a real tall, slender stem, and then it's got a little of
And
flowers
that
on top
comes
of
in
it.
lots of different
That comes in a
colors.
lot of flowers too, and the sages too, or salvias come in red.
These all perennials?
No, these are all annuals. The non-natives are all annuals, except for this one. This is a butterfly bush or buddleia. It will come back, although it's not real reliably hardy up here. If you have a kind of a sheltered location where you grow it, it'll probably come back. This is another one where in some areas of this country it's considered to be invasive because it does create a lot of seed, mostly further south. It's one that they really are beautiful and they really are attractive to butterflies. But again, I would say if you can select some kind of a native plant that provides the same benefits and not use the non-native.
Speaking of invasive, I know, I heard they were working on a Norway maple that is not invasive. Has that happened yet that you know of or not? Because that's starting to grow all over the place now.
Yeah, Norway maple seed like crazy. And yeah, I know that there's work on them. I don't know if they've come up with one that's reliably sterile. I wouldn't bet on it.
Just put in a sugar maple.
Just put in a sugar maple. Yeah, they're just beautiful.
Nice.
I want you also to think about, we're talking about butterflies all this time, but I want to include moths too, because moths are really cool. I think they're underappreciated. A lot of them are small and kind of nondescript and not very exciting, but there are some really neat moths out there. And since some moths fly during the day, like hummingbird moths or clearwing moths, but a lot of them, of course, are active at night. So think about planting some plants that will bloom at night and will attract some of the moths. So things like evening primrose opens up at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and stays open overnight, and then it closes up again in the morning. The white flowered forms of Nicotiana, or flowering tobacco, are really good for moths. Moonflower, which is a type of a morning glory. Angel's trumpet is another one. If you get the white flowered varieties, they look really cool. You can have a moon garden that glows in the moonlight. And if you plant some of these, you might get things like the white-lined sphinx moth. Beautiful, beautiful little moths. Look at that long proboscis that he's got there. It's ideal for zipping into tubular flowers and getting to that nectar that's way, way down in the bottom there. Okay, now we'll talk about host plants. These have all been nectar plants so far. Now we're going to talk about the food for the caterpillars. There aren't as many non-native host plants as there are natives. And that makes sense, again, because, evolving together, the non-native plants weren't here. The insects that are native to our area wouldn't have developed with them, wouldn't have evolved with them, don't really know how to use them. But there are a lot of native species that are very, very valuable. And probably the best host plants for butterflies and moths are trees, certain types of trees, especially oak, willow, cherries, wild cherries, the poplars like cottonwood and aspen. Those groups of trees support hundreds of insects. And in fact, I printed off a list of the top woody plants, trees and shrubs, for butterflies and moths, for caterpillars. Oak, cherry, willow, birch, the aspens, crab apples, maples. Those species all support at least 300 different types of moths and butterflies. And an oak, the oak species are the top. They support like over 500 different species. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of those are little moths that are not going to be real exciting, but they're very, very important. And the reason they're important is because they feed birds. And if you want birds in your yard, you want to have insects. This is contrary to everything that every gardener ever learned. Bugs are good in your yard because they feed other creatures. They're the basis of that whole food pyramid or food web. So a chickadee, just for an example, a pair of chickadees, in order to raise one brood of young, have to catch somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 caterpillars over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks. Where are they going to get those caterpillars? They're going to be on the trees. They're going to be on the oaks and the willows and the birches and so on. These other birds, those two are eating other flying insects, but the same thing goes for them as well. Those little caterpillars, those little inchworm type caterpillars and things that are living on the trees are the food for our birds, especially when they're feeding their young. So encouraging butterflies to use your yard is probably going to benefit the birds as well. Plus a lot of the shrubs, especially if you plant shrubs and trees, those are beneficial for the birds.
You will see circle of life.
You will. And sometimes it's a bird eating your favorite butterfly too, but you know, that happens. Again, some other examples of native plants that are really good host plants. Violets. A lot of people think violets are weeds, and they can be kind of aggressive and take over, but they are the host plant for fritillary butterflies.
Right.
You may never see those caterpillars because they're small and they're hiding under the leaves, and unless you get down on your hands and knees and really look for them. But they're very, very important. Pussy toes, which is kind of a weed. It's not a real flashy wildflower, but it provides food for the caterpillars of the American lady butterfly. They look like pussy toes because they do. They look like a kitten's paw. They're really cute little plants. I even saw a pink flowered variety. When I was doing research, they had a pink one. Nettles. How many of you try to get rid of nettles in your yard? They are the host plant for red admiral butterflies. And if you look closely at them, if you look closely at the nettles, you'll notice in about May or early June, a lot of the leaves getting chewed up and these little black spiny caterpillars on there. Those are the red admiral caterpillars. Vines. This is a vine called woodbine, which is really common. Sometimes it's called Virginia creeper. Very common in this part of Wisconsin. Beautiful fall color. It supports the caterpillars of the Pandora Sphinx moth. Beautiful moth. And a huge, when I
And it's a
found,
huge moth.
found that caterpillar, and it's as big as my thumb, and it's like 4 inches long, and I was, what in the world is this? So I had to keep it, and of course it formed a cocoon, and then this beautiful kind of camouflaged army green moth came out. Just stunning. Other non-native host plants, like I said, there aren't as many, but there are a couple that are really good. Anything that's in the dill family, dill, parsley, celery, fennel, Queen Anne's lace, another weedy plant, those all are supporting the beautiful caterpillars of what?
Swallowtails.
Swallowtails, that's right. The black swallowtail, the tiger swallowtail, both of them feed on, you know, if you're growing dill because you want to make pickles in the summer, you may have these caterpillars munching it down to nothing. But they're just gorgeous, and I can just about guarantee if you plant one of the plants in this family, you're going to have caterpillars on it sooner or later. I also like lilacs. Lilacs aren't used by a lot of species. They do provide nectar fairly early in the season, and I think we maybe appreciate them more than the butterflies. But they do support one really cool insect. Anyone ever see caterpillars like this? Again, this is one that's like as big around as your thumb. They're about 4 inches long when they're mature. They look like they're made out of like gummy something or other.
Isn't it being parasitized?
No, all of those little bumps and things on there are perfectly normal.
The oranges?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
They have little red things on their
Okay.
head, and then yellow, and they got little blue spines on the side. I think that's supposed to deter birds from eating them because it makes them look a little bit scary, even though those spines are kind of soft and fleshy. But anybody know what that caterpillar turns into?
Here comes the reveal.
Cecropia moths. These are the most, they're big. They're like, this big a wingspan. They're gorgeous, gorgeous moths. Now, if you wanted to attract the adults of the Cecropia moth, what would you plant? It's a trick question because as adults, they don't eat. They do all their eating as a caterpillar. And that's probably why they get so fat. But once they become an adult, they only live a short time, and their only purpose as an adult is to breed, so they don't even eat. But if you have the host plants for them, and they do like lilacs, they'll also feed on crabapple. You might be lucky enough to find these guys in your yard. Pretty amazing. As I mentioned before, a butterfly garden doesn't have to be anything huge. Even if all you have is a stone patio next to your house, you can put in planters, you can put in containers, and you'll notice here that they repeated things in a couple different places. You got a couple of pots with that purple, I'm not sure if that's a verbena or what that is, and then they've got some taller, some cosmos back there, and they've got a vine of some sort going up the side. You can put out a little container or two with butterfly plants, with nectar plants or host plants, and you're probably going to have butterflies and other pollinators, which are important too, using them. So I would encourage you, even if you've got a teeny tiny yard, to go ahead and do that. I do have a couple of resources for you, and there's two handouts over on the table here. One of them is a resource list that has some of the references that I used when I was pulling together information on this program. I want to just mention two of them that are on that list. The North American Butterfly Association has some really, really good stuff on their website. They have brochures, and you can look at them as a PDF or print them if you want to. They have regional lists of nectar plants and host plants. Unfortunately, they don't have a regional one for Northeast Wisconsin. But they do have a Southwest Wisconsin, which isn't too bad. A lot of the species that they mentioned there will probably grow up here too. They have the basics of butterfly gardening. They have butterfly biology, which is really interesting. They also have a certification program where you can actually get your backyard butterfly habitat certified, and if you meet certain criteria, which is kind of fun. The other one is Monarch Watch, and their website is just monarchwatch.org. They are the source of information for all things related to monarchs. They have research articles, they have, you can shop, they've got t-shirts and things like that. They also coordinate the monarch tagging program, which happens in the fall. And you can actually, anybody can take part in this. Basically what you do is you buy the tags, you put them on the butterfly's wings as they're flying south to Mexico, and then if they are recovered again somewhere else, they can look up the number and say, oh, that butterfly flew from Algoma, Wisconsin and ended up in Texas or in Mexico or wherever it ended up. It's kind of like bird banding, except with butterflies. And that is a really cool program. Also lots of really neat information about if you want to raise monarch caterpillars, how you go about doing that. So I highly recommend that website. And then there's some other ones on the resource list too. Oh, yes.
Are there other butterflies that migrate?
Are there other butterflies? Yes. The American lady butterfly or painted lady butterfly, they migrate. I'm not sure exactly where they go. I think they go down to the southwestern U.S. and then migrate back up into the rest of the country. There are probably other species too, but right off by the top of my head, I don't know what they would be. So the only thing left to do is start planning. This is an ideal time of year to start planning your butterfly garden. And plant a few things this summer, and most importantly, get out there and enjoy it. Get out there and see what's using it. Look at what's chewing on the leaves in your yard, and you might be surprised at how many different species you're supporting. Now, does anybody have any other questions or comments to share? Your experiences with butterfly gardening? Nothing at all.
Works really well in a bird bistro.
It works for, yes, bird bistros and butterfly gardens go hand in hand. Right. Well, if you do want one of those handouts, they're up here on the table. I would encourage you to grab one. Otherwise, thank you again for coming, and good luck with your butterfly habitats.